The alien commander came to inspect a human academy. He left questioning everything. I have inspected 47 academies across 11 species. I have walked through the crystal halls of the Cathari, where cadets stand so still they look like statues, and where the only sound is the instructor's voice bouncing off polished floors. I have toured the Urinth training grounds, where everything runs on a timer and every movement is logged, measured, and compared against a standard set 300 years ago by a general who never lost a battle. Every species that joins the Galactic Dominion, when they are ready, builds their academies in our image. Same structure, same rules, same results. Then I received orders to inspect a human military academy on the planet they call Earth. My aide, SUS Commander Telleth, read the preliminary report before I did. He handed it to me without a word and walked out of the room faster than I had ever seen him move. In 12 years of working together, that had never happened before. I should have taken that as a warning. I arrived at 0600 hours, local time. The air was cold and smelled like damp soil and something sharp that humans call pine. The academy sat on a wide stretch of green land surrounded by tall trees. It was not what I expected. Dominion academies are built of clean lines and pale stone. This place had red brick walls, a clock tower, and ivy growing up the sides of the older buildings. It looked almost comfortable. The cadets were already in formation when I stepped through the main gate. Hundreds of them, standing in perfectly straight rows, eyes forward, shoulders back. From a distance, it looked exactly like every other academy I had ever inspected. Then I got closer. 2 cadets in the 3rd row were having an argument entirely with their eyes. Small shifts in expression, a raised eyebrow, a tiny shake of the head. The one on the left was working very hard not to smile. His jaw was so tight it was shaking. The one on the right looked like he was threatening the other one with a look alone. And their commanding officer, standing right in front of them, either did not notice or did not care. Commandant Reyes was a human woman of middle age, with short dark hair and the posture of someone who has decided that gravity is merely a suggestion. She walked toward me with steady steps, saluted with one hand, apparently this is standard for humans, and welcomed me to the academy without a single trace of nervousness. In 47 inspections, not one academy director had ever looked at me the way she did, not with fear, not with eagerness to impress, not with the stiff formality I had come to expect. She looked at me the way someone looks at a mildly interesting problem they have already started solving. "Commander Vrethkal," she said, "we have been expecting you. I hope your journey was comfortable." "It was standard," I said. "Shall we begin?" "Whenever you are ready," she said, and turned to lead me inside. We passed a large board near the entrance of the main building. It was covered in papers. Notices about schedules, upcoming events, and in the middle of all of it, several pieces of paper with handwritten jokes. I stopped walking. One read, "The Dominion said humans couldn't survive in vacuum. We said hold our oxygen." I stared at it for a moment. I turned to Telleth, who was standing very quietly beside me. "What does that mean?" I asked him quietly. "Hold their oxygen. It is a human expression," he said, in an equally quiet voice. "It means they were unconcerned, that they accepted the challenge." I looked at the paper again. Then I looked at Commandant Reyes, who was waiting for me a few steps ahead, watching me with a calm expression. "Interesting," I said. I wrote nothing in my report yet. I was not sure what I would say. The morning drills were the first real test. I expected to see what I always see at strong academies: clean movement, fast response, good discipline. I was prepared to be impressed in the normal way and to write normal notes. What I saw was all of that, and something else. The cadets moved well. They moved very well. Their speed and coordination were beyond what I expected for organic beings of their size and age. The obstacle course was completed in times that would have been acceptable even at senior Dominion academies. The formation drills were sharp and exact, but between the exercises, they talked to each other. Not whispers, not careful hidden exchanges. Quick words, short jokes, a shoulder tap, a nod. One cadet imitated the face of another with exaggerated drama, and 3 of the nearby cadets almost broke composure trying not to laugh. The drill instructor, a large man with a voice like a cliff falling into the sea, watched this happen. He did not punish it. He made a short comment back to the cadet who had done the impression, and 2 cadets in the front row actually did laugh, quietly, before pulling themselves back to attention. I wrote in my report, "Irregular emotional expression during high-stress simulation sequences." Then the results came in. The squad that had been joking the most, the ones in the front row who had laughed, had the highest cohesion score in the obstacle clearing exercise, 11% above the second-place squad. I looked at my report. I looked at the score. I deleted the note about irregular emotional expression. I did not replace it with anything. I stood very still for a moment and looked at the drill instructor, who was now giving a short review of the exercise with his cadets gathered around him. They were listening closely. One raised a hand and asked a question. The instructor nodded and answered it seriously, without any suggestion that the question was unwelcome. I had a strange feeling I had no word for. The strategy classroom was in the older part of the building, up a staircase with worn stone steps. When I stepped inside, the first thing I noticed was that it was loud. Not chaotic, not disrespectful, but loud in the way a place is loud when everyone inside it is thinking very hard and saying what they think. The professor was a small, older man named Dr. Okafor. He walked with a slight limp and wore no rank insignia that I could identify. He was standing at the front of the room with his arms crossed, listening to a cadet challenge his reading of the Third Cathari conflict. The cadet, a young woman with very precise speech, was saying that the professor's interpretation ignored the resource pressure the Cathari Eastern Division was facing in the final months of the campaign, and that without accounting for that pressure, the strategic decisions appeared worse than they actually were in context. Dr. Okafor listened. He did not interrupt. When she finished, he nodded slowly. "That is a fair point," he said. "Now prove it. You have 10 minutes to build a counter-argument that holds under cross-examination. Go." The cadet sat down and immediately started writing. The students around her were already talking, helping, pushing back on her ideas, sharpening her thinking against theirs. I stood in the doorway for a long time. Tellith eventually touched my arm and reminded me, in a very quiet voice, that I was still visible. I stepped fully inside. In Dominion academies, the professor speaks and the cadets learn. The professor holds the doctrine, the cadets receive it. This system has worked for centuries. We have produced competent officers, disciplined soldiers, and stable chains of command. The idea that a student might challenge a professor's reading of military history, and be told that doing so was good, was so far outside my understanding that I could not immediately process it. I asked Commandant Reyes, who had followed me upstairs, what the purpose of this exercise was. She did not hesitate. If a cadet cannot challenge a weak argument in a classroom, they will not challenge a weak order in the field, she said. We do not want officers who follow instructions because they have never been taught to think for themselves. We want officers who follow good instructions because they understand why the instructions are good, and who know what to do when the instructions are no longer good. I looked at her for a moment. That sounds like a path toward insubordination, I said. It sounds like that, she agreed, until you see the results. I did not write anything in my report for the next 40 minutes. I simply watched. The cadet presented her counter-argument. It was strong. Dr. Okafor took it apart with 3 precise questions. She rebuilt it. He approved the rebuild and told her which part of it she should carry forward as the foundation of her own tactical thinking. I had never seen a professor hand a student a piece of doctrine the student had helped create. I was not sure I had a category for it. The afternoon had one scheduled pause that I had not seen in my briefing materials. Commandant Reyes had not mentioned it. There was simply a break in the schedule at 1400 hours with no label. I followed the cadets outside. There was a courtyard on the west side of the academy, tucked between 2 older buildings, open to the sky. In the center of it was a wall. It was not a decorative wall. It was a long, flat surface of dark gray stone, and it was covered with names. Hundreds of them. Perhaps more. The names were carved into the stone in careful letters, and below some of them were small symbols I did not recognize. Rank insignia, I assumed, from different eras. The entire academy gathered there without being told to hurry. They moved into the courtyard in groups, filling the space. And then they were quiet. Not ordered to be quiet. They simply became quiet. They stood in front of that wall, and they were still. Some bowed their heads, some kept their eyes on the names. One cadet toward the back of the crowd was crying, not loudly, not dramatically, just silently, with tears moving down his face while he stood at attention and stared at a name I could not read from where I stood. No one looked at him with judgment. No one moved to correct him or tell him to compose himself. The instructor standing nearest to him briefly put a hand on the young man's shoulder, left it there for a moment, and then removed it. That was all. 7 minutes passed. No one spoke. Then, at the end of those 7 minutes, a cadet near the front read aloud, "We remember so we know what we are protecting. We know what we are protecting so we know why we fight." They did not all say it together. The single cadet said it, and silence followed, and then people began to move again, quietly, back toward their afternoon duties. I stood in that courtyard for a while after most of them had left. Tellith stood beside me, and he was looking at his boots. I looked at the wall. I looked at the names. In Dominion academies, we have memorial rites. They are formal and spoken and brief. An officer lists the losses, affirms the mission, and the unit is dismissed. It takes 4 minutes at most. It is dignified and efficient. I had never stood in silence for 7 minutes in front of anything. I had never watched a room full of trained soldiers grieve for people they had never met, grieve for them willingly, without being instructed to, because they understood that those names on that wall were the reason they were standing in this courtyard learning how to fight. I found, in that moment, that something was happening to me that I did not entirely understand, a feeling that was not comfortable and not unpleasant, something that made the air feel heavier and cleaner at the same time. I did not write anything about it in my report. Commandant Reyes invited me to her office at the end of the day. It was a small room with a large window that looked out over the training grounds. There were papers on the desk, a flat screen with scheduling data, and a framed photograph on the wall of a group of cadets at what appeared to be a graduation ceremony. Some of them were laughing. Some of them were crying. One of them was doing both. She poured me something from a dark pot, coffee. It was hot, and it smelled like scorched wood and something bitter and deep. I tasted it, and held very still for a moment. She drank hers without any expression of discomfort, as though it was completely normal. That told me more about humans than almost anything else I had seen all day. "You have questions," she said. It was not really a question. "I have many questions," I agreed. "Ask one," she said. I considered. Then I said, "Your academy does not follow Dominion standards. Your cadets express emotion during training. They challenge their instructors. Your memorial practices have no prescribed format or duration. Your walls have jokes on them." I paused. "Why does it work?" She was quiet for a moment. She looked out the window at the training grounds, now empty in the early evening light. "Your academies build soldiers who know how to follow," she said. "That is a real strength. Following well, following fast, following without hesitation when the situation calls for it. Those things save lives. We know that." She looked back at me. "We tried building our academies that way. For a long time, and it worked, until the moment came when the doctrine did not cover the situation, and the officer in the field had never been taught to do anything except look for the doctrine." She set her cup down. "We started building soldiers who know why they are following, who understand the mission deeply enough that when the orders stop making sense, they can think, and when the orders stop coming at all, they can lead. Does that not create soldiers who question too much?" I asked. "It creates soldiers who question at the right time," she said. "In the classroom, yes, question everything. On the field, when the plan is sound and the moment is now, you move. The questioning happened already. You trust the thinking you did before the shooting started." I thought about the cadet who had rebuilt her argument in Dr. Okafor's class. I thought about the squad that joked between drills and still had the highest cohesion score. I thought about a young man crying in front of a wall of names because he understood, fully and completely, what those names meant. "And the memorial," I said, "the silence, no format, no prescribed words." "The prescribed words come at the end," she said. "But grief needs room before it gets words. If you give people only the formal version, they perform it. If you give them the silence first, they actually feel it. And soldiers who have felt what loss means fight differently than soldiers who have only been told about it." I sat with that for a moment. "Differently how?" I asked. "More carefully," she said, "with more thought for the people beside them, with a stronger reason than duty alone." She looked at me steadily. "Duty is a good reason to fight. It is not always enough to keep you going when everything falls apart. Meaning is what keeps you going." The room was quiet except for the wind outside and the distant sound of cadets moving through an evening routine somewhere in the building below us. I finished the coffee. It still tasted like something had gone wrong at a high temperature and no one had stopped it in time. I finished it anyway because I had started it and because Commandant Reyes was watching me in the calm, patient way she had watched me all day, like she was waiting to see what I would do when the situation was not in the briefing materials. "I have to file a report," I told her. "I know," she said. "Your academy is not compliant with 42 Dominion standards," I said. "I know that too," she said, and there was no apology in her voice, no defensiveness, just the same calm that had been there all day. I stood up and thanked her for her time. She walked me to the door. At the threshold I stopped. "The cadet who was crying," I said, "at the memorial. Will that be noted against him?" She looked at me with an expression I did not have a word for in my language, something between patience and something softer. "No," she said simply, "it will not." I nodded and left. I sat in my transport for 4 hours on the way back to the Dominion vessel. Tellith did not speak. He looked out the window at the darkening landscape and said nothing, which was, I realized, his way of giving me room to think. In 12 years I had not always recognized when he was doing that. I recognized it now. The inspection report was open on my screen. The template was familiar. Compliant, non-compliant, conditional approval, notes, recommendations. I looked at the numbers. The Academy's combat cohesion scores were the highest I had recorded in over a decade of inspections. Their tactical creativity results did not fit our evaluation rubric at all. We did not have a column for it. Their retention rate, the number of cadets who began training and stayed through completion, was among the lowest dropout figures I had ever seen. And when I looked at the data behind that number, it was not because students were prevented from leaving. It was because they did not want to leave. They knew why they were there. I looked at the blank notes field for a long time. Then I started writing. Under compliance status, I put, non-standard, recommend further study. Under notes, I wrote more than I had ever written in that field in 47 inspections. I wrote that this academy operated on principles that did not match Dominion standards, and that after a full day of observation, I was not prepared to say those principles were wrong. I wrote that they had found a way to build soldiers who understood their own purpose deeply enough to carry it forward without being told to at every step. I wrote that the emotional expression I had initially flagged as irregular appeared to be a feature rather than a flaw, and that cohesion data supported this. I wrote that the classroom method of encouraging challenge was producing officers who could think independently when doctrine failed them, and that this was a capability Dominion academies did not reliably produce. I wrote about the memorial. I wrote about the 7 minutes of silence and what it seemed to accomplish that 4 minutes of formal procedure did not. I was careful with my words there. I was not sure I had the right ones. I tried anyway. At the end, I added one more line that I had not planned to add. I looked at it for a while before deciding to leave it. It said, I would recommend that Dominion leadership consider not evaluating this academy against our existing standards, but asking ourselves whether our existing standards account for everything a strong academy needs to produce. I believe they may not. I believe these humans may have found something we have not named yet. I believe we should ask them to help us name it, though I expect they would make us argue with them first, and I expect they would be right to do so. I closed the report. Outside the transport window, the lights of the academy were still visible in the distance, small and steady against the dark. I looked at them for a long time before we were too far away to see them anymore.